Within the classical Chinese text, the Zhuangzi, there is a motif of a big but useless tree. The tree introduces us to a number of ideas, the most notable of which is a perspective-driven relativism that undermines the authority of conventional value standards by asserting the great use of uselessness. This idea, which may seem far-fetched and paradoxical, will, I hope, prove to be an insightful argument with modern significance. In an essay of mine linked in the description, I've written on the motif as a whole, but in this video, I'd like to give special attention to the most significant of the tree's appearances, its encounter with Craftsman Xi. Before breaking it down and examining it in pieces, here's my translation of its entirety. Craftsman Xi was going to Qi when he arrived at Chuyuan, and caught sight of an oak tree that stood at a shrine. It was large enough to cover several thousand oxen, measuring 100 spans round. It was tall enough to overlook mountains, springing its branches only after 100 feet. Boats tens of measures wide were able to be made using it, and onlookers crowded it like a marketplace. The old craftsman, however, didn't look back at it, continuing on his journey without interruption. Once the craftsman's apprentice was satisfied in looking at it, he ran to catch up with Craftsman Xi and said, "Since I took up the axe to follow you, I've not yet encountered nor seen timber as beautiful as this. Yet, from the beginning, you were unwilling to look at it, continuing on without interruption. Why?" Craftsman Xi replied, "Stop. Don't speak of it. It is a scattered tree. Use it to make a ship, and the ship will sink. Use it to make a coffin, and the coffin will quickly rot. Use it to make an instrument, and the instrument will quickly fall apart. Use it to make a door, and the door will ooze sap. Use it to make a post, and the post will be eaten away. This tree is of no talent. It is without that which can be used. Hence why it has been able to live so long." Craftsman Xi had returned home when the tree of the shrine appeared to him in a dream and said, "What do you compare me to? Is it that you compare me to those adorned trees? Those types of hawthorns, pears, oranges, pomelos, melons, and other fruits? Once their fruits are ripe, they are stripped off, and in such exploitation they are abused. Their large branches are broken off, and their small branches are cut back. By these means, their abilities make their lives miserable. Hence, they do not complete their heaven-endowed lifespan, and die young in the midst of their course, having beaten and destroyed themselves with the conventions of the world. Not a thing defies this. Furthermore, I've sought to be without that which can be used for a long time, nearly dying. Only now have I obtained it, and it serves me the greatest use. Had I had a use, how would I have obtained this greatness? Not only that, you and I are both beings. How can one being assess another? And how could a scattered man close to death know about a scattered tree?" Craftsman Xi awoke and interpreted the meaning of his dream. His apprentice asked, "If it urges to be useless, then why does it serve the shrine?" Craftsman Xi replied, "Quiet! Don't speak like that. Those people just set up and took refuge there. It regards those who don't value its true quality as disgraceful and harmful. Were it not to serve as a shrine, then it wouldn't be far from getting cut apart. Moreover, that which it protects, and that which protects it, is different from the crowd. To praise it for its duty, wouldn't that be missing the point?" Now, let's try to work through the story so as to not miss the point. To do so, I'll break it down into 3 divisions. Of course, the analysis begins at the first. The story begins by describing a fantastical tree, taller than mountains and wide enough to shade 1,000 oxen. The unbelievable size has attracted a crowd of onlookers as if the shrine were a marketplace. Everyone is in awe of it, including the apprentice who says it's the finest timber he's ever seen. Yet, for some reason, Craftsman Xi doesn't bat an eye. This is particularly surprising to his apprentice and to us, because, as the apprentice's words show, Craftsman Xi isn't just an artisan, but a carpenter or woodworker. His very own craft is the manipulation and use of wood, and here he encounters a tree of such incredible woodworking potential that it could be used to complete enormous, or on a different translation, numerous ships. Yet, Craftsman Xi couldn't care less, walking on without stopping. His apprentice, as shocked as we are, prods his master for an explanation, after getting a good look of his own. In his response, Craftsman Xi scolds his apprentice, delivers harsh judgment on the tree, and voices his reasons for doing so. To start with the conclusion, Xi has no interest in the tree because the tree is talentless and useless. In saying so, the craftsman belittles the big tree, discarding it because it's no good and entirely devoid of worth. But what leads him to do so? As it turns out, it's the same thing that surprised us: his occupation as a woodworker. Shi is an experienced woodworker with a good eye for timber and an apprentice of his own. It's important not to confuse the experienced woodworker with the skillful craftsmen that populate the rest of the text. Cook Ding, for example. These craftsmen are portrayed as extremely skillful, even spirit-like, creating miraculous products through spontaneous action and often after fasting their heart minds. But craftsman Shi is not one of these craftsmen. He is very much of this world. Rather than being learned in the ways of action through non-action, Shi is learned in the ways of conventional society, namely the business of a woodworker. Before measuring a tree with his ruler or arc, Shi measures it for its utility and ability to produce profit. Any tree that proves useless is rendered bad and worthless in the eye of this very conventional evaluative standard. But this is only half of the puzzle. If the standard truly is that of the woodworker and others as well, then why did the apprentice render identical judgment on the tree? Well, he didn't because of his inexperience. Craftsman Shi, the old woodworker, can tell from a quick look that the tree is useless, or translated literally, without that which can be used. Whatever is made from the tree's wood is sure to fail, be it ship, coffin, door, or anything else. Had the apprentice seen this too, he would have been expected to continue his journey without stopping as well. Hence, despite the fact that the craftsman and his apprentice came to two different conclusions, one praising it and the other condemning it, they both use the same conventional evaluative method, judging its worth based on its perceived utility. Only the craftsman had a better eye for timber, and therefore greater knowledge on which to base his judgment. But this isn't all, since Shi also tells the reason for the tree's uselessness. It is a scattered tree. The character for scattered here is san, which has meanings of scattered, relaxed, let go of, unregulated, imperfect, and the like. But it has often been translated as worthless or talentless, making the comment of little significance, simply repeating what is later said. Translating it as such, I believe, misses something important, because the tree's condition as scattered is the clearest cause for the tree's inabilities and uselessness. In Livia Cohen's reading, this scattered nature refers to the status of the tree's qi, or vital energy. Consequently, in light of the other stories of big but useless trees, the tree has scattered physical features as well, being twisted and gnarled, splotched and split. In both ways, a particular manner of growing into a diffuse form is the cause of its inefficiency, but this will present more significant later. Before concluding his remarks, Craftsman Shi manages one important insight. It is precisely because of its uselessness that the tree has been able to live so long, growing to its fantastical size. Coming from the craftsman, this remark is depreciative, but as we'll see in the next section, this idea holds more weight than the craftsman gives it. Stepping back from the text and the tree, much of this should prove relevant to our modern context, save the fantastical enormity of the tree. Most notably, Shi's evaluative standard, whereby the useful is the good and the profitable is the valuable, is by no means rare to us today, as utility stands as one of the most common measures of worth in contemporary society. This is needless to say for judgments made in the context of business, wherein the foremost measure is the ability to produce profit. With decisions based on productive capabilities, the inefficient and the useless are discarded. Such is the virtue accredited to the system. But the authority of utility doesn't end there. Education programs such as those in the humanities, be it art, literature, or even philosophy, are frequently threatened by cuts. Perceived as devoid of use value, these programs fail the measure of utility and are consequently deemed worthless, undeserving of support or attention. And more generally, when we say things like, "Don't do it, it's useless," or "Don't get it, it's useless," we rule negative judgment on the worth of the it at hand. The authority of utility then imposes upon contemporary society, much as it is imposed upon the tree that stood at the shrine. Thus, we look to the tree for its response, an answer to the question, just how authoritative is the use value standard? The tree's words are the heart of the story, and, I believe, classic Zhuangzi, demonstrative of much of the text in both thought and method. The big but useless tree appears to Shi through a dream, to offer its own perspective, disrupting our innate human point of view by presenting a speaking tree with a thought process, perspective, and set of interests of its own, and, through its words, the craftsman's judgment is subverted and inverted. The tree is well aware of the craftsman's evaluation and reasoning. From the get-go, it acknowledges the unsaid that underlies his judgment. The tree is rendered valueless in light of the woodworker's experience with a countless number of valuable or adorned trees. What I've translated as adorned is the character when, sometimes translated simply as useful, and serves to contrast san, translated as scattered before. Thus, it is in contrast to the adorned and refined useful trees that the scattered and misshapen useless tree is judged to be worthless. Normally, this goes unsaid and is of little concern. Of course the nice fruit trees are better, but we are quick to be reminded of the shift in perspective, and with it, a shift in values. What follows is demonstrative of Zhuangzi's relativism, as the presupposed meaning of what a good tree is subverted with a quick shift in the context that the judgment is made in. Being useful can no longer mean being good when the danger of usefulness is considered. The adorned trees all have a use, be it timber or fruit. With the use, they are used up, exploited, and abused. Told by a tree, the breaking and cutting of branches holds unforeseen weight, as the thing that the craftsman found desirable turns out to be the very same thing that makes a tree's life miserable. A useful tree is chopped up, exploited to exhaustion, and robbed of its heaven-endowed, or natural, lifespan. So by subjecting themselves to worldly customs and conventions, they make themselves useful, and being useful, they are beaten and destroyed, hacked apart before their time is due. Intoxicated by conforming to the customs that would see them in pieces, their doom is their own doing. Not a thing defies this reasoning. Use entails abuse. This is the danger of usefulness. Having already subverted the craftsman's judgment by demonstrating the danger of usefulness, the tree goes on to invert it by introducing the usefulness of uselessness. For long, the tree has actively sought and worked on becoming without that which can be used, nearly dying in the process. This is where the scattered or misshapen form and qi returns. The tree had long been useful, yet by rejecting worldly customs and manipulating its qi and physical features, the tree has finally achieved uselessness. And as it turns out, this uselessness is of great use to the tree. It allows the tree to live and grow while its compatriots are cut down. Only in being useless has the tree enabled itself to flourish free from abuse and exploitation, to be simply so of itself. Just as the tree argued for the danger of usefulness, it is argued for the safety of uselessness. Now, at this point, it might be easy to mistake this as an argument against making use-value judgments and making use of things in general, instead for letting things and others simply be as they are. However, while this is an idea elsewhere in the text, it isn't the idea here for two reasons. First, as a tree, the tree is in no place for making use of other things, and only takes issue with the craftsman's judgment, not his profession. Second, the tree does in fact make a use-value judgment, in declaring its uselessness as its greatest use. This idea, which sounds contradictory, is made coherent through the recognition of judgments stemming from different perspectives, that is, a recognition of some form of relativism. Uselessness means that, from the perspective of others, the tree has no use value, and would therefore not make for good timber. Usefulness means that, from the perspective of the tree, this perceived uselessness frees it from abuse, and allows it to flourish. Hence, from a different perspective, with a different goal, the tree's scattered form proves a benefit rather than a detriment. Usefulness, then, is relative to the perspective making the judgment. It is from this point of view that the last two questions arise. Given that what is valued differs from a change in perspective, how can one being assess another? How can a man know a tree? And how can there be concrete, authoritative valuations if a simple shift of perspective crumbles them? With the heart of the story considered, we can now bring it into a modern context. Its relevance might be questioned as humans and trees may seem a world apart. But so long as we don't reduce the story to mere environmentalism, then the tree's words must have significance for humanity, including us today. We've already discussed the prominence of use-value measurements today, but we haven't entertained the idea of the object of usage being a person. Is that because it's inconceivable? Clearly not, so long as the same judgment is being made when it regards which products to produce, as well as which personnel to hire. As Heidegger pointed out, the talk about human resources shows that our attitude towards other people is not disconnected from our attitude towards natural resources, like timber. If people were only valued for their use in the economy, we might not consider that an issue. Still, some would consider it the virtue of the system, to reward each according to his ability. But today, the authority of utility has no border. The universal command to make yourself useful demands one to be of service to the economy to the nation, to a cause, or to one's family or friends, and those that fail to do so are deemed good for nothing, worthless, or worse, a leech. But just how great is usefulness today? Undoubtedly, in many cases, being useful today similarly causes one to be used up to exhaustion. The more one extends their services, the more those services will be taken advantage of, until they can be no longer. The one most useful to the business is likely the one taking on the greatest burden of work. The one making themselves useful to the nation is willing to put their life on the line. And being useful to one's friends and family, while possible in a healthy manner, can often mean that one is being taken advantage of, yet rationalized because of a specific relationship. And in some cases, those in their youth who display marvelous talent at something are forced to pursue that talent so long as they can. In each case, being and making oneself useful can lend into exploitation, as it did for the adorned trees. Yet the danger of usefulness is swept under the rug, so long as utility is accepted as authoritative. The adorned trees were not merely exploited and abused by others, they beat and injured themselves because they had sought to be useful. Adopting the vulgar conventions of the world, chasing usefulness, their efforts were recognized, and they were promptly stolen of their goods. Does the same not happen today? We put our talents on display on social media to show that we're worth something, and our achievements on CVs to show that we have some value. Furthermore, we seek to prove our usefulness through maximizing our productivity, even to the extent that we feel guilt during those times where productivity is supposed to be foregone, as during leisure, breaks, and vacations. We accept that the more useful we make ourselves, the better we are. Yet, unless we are to lay down our very lives to serve some use, there will always be times when we are not useful, and in viewing our utility as our worth, we render ourselves worthless during those times, leading to inevitable unhappiness. Even more so for those that adopt the authority of utility while also seeing themselves as good for nothing, living every day thinking usefulness determines worth, but, in line with societal conventions, thinking themselves useless. Thus, not only can abilities make life miserable, but so does the lack of abilities when coupled with the desire for utility. But how absolute is utility's authority? Is it not something that has been thus far constructed to such a magnitude? This is the question of the relativist, intent at destabilizing the foundations that we assume to be so strong. Had the tree sought Craftsman Xi's approval, it would have been met with an axe rather than harsh words. But can that which is without any use today prove to have any value? The study of philosophy is commonly considered a useless endeavor, especially at the undergraduate level, where a degree in philosophy appears to pale in comparison with STEM alternatives. This, I don't believe, needs to be refuted. As Bertrand Russell wrote, utility does not belong to philosophy. If the study of philosophy has any value at all for others than students of philosophy, then it must be only indirectly, through its effects upon the lives of those who study it. The uselessness of philosophy doesn't entail worthlessness. At least some of the value of philosophy lies in its very ability to free us of our most harmful conventional assumptions and create the possibility for genuine flourishing and personal growth, not unlike the value of uselessness for the tree. Thus, conventional standards fail to measure the value of philosophy, as they had for the tree. Ultimately, we have no need to accept the customary authority of utility. Being good for nothing has nothing to do with being no good. What it means to be good is up to one's discretion, now unburdened by conventional assumptions. The tree's comments prove revelatory, as Craftsman Xi wakes up and makes sense of them. But the apprentice, not having been visited by the tree himself, is not so convinced. The tree had made a serious point of its condition of uselessness, stating that it had attained being without that which can be used. But now, isn't it being used, acting or serving either as a shrine or for the shrine? The apprentice's challenge is a difficult one, and one that we'd hope would be resolved by the tree itself. But only the craftsman is left to answer, and with a different perspective than the tree, he's clearly in a deficient position. Nonetheless, Craftsman Xi answers with an illuminating response. He quiets his apprentice, possibly for fear of his apprentice getting scolded by the tree in his dreams like he was himself. Then he defends the tree by suggesting that it wasn't a matter of choice that the shrine was erected there. As it was in ancient China, the tallest of trees were viewed as connections to heaven, and therefore deserving of a shrine. Hence, by means of its uselessness. The tree grew large enough to reach heaven and receive a shrine. As a shrine, it is no longer completely ignored, finding itself within a crowd similar to a marketplace. Among this crowd, those that don't value its true quality, as I've translated it, are disrespectful and bothersome. This applies to the craftsman at the beginning of the story and even the apprentice now. But now, having received a shrine, is the tree really still useless? Does the statement, were it not to serve as a shrine, then it wouldn't be far from getting cut apart, not admit some form of use? It might be the case that this suggests a form of flexibility, suggesting that the tree has relinquished its uselessness in favor of a use that would solicit its survival. Uselessness, then, would not be the most desirable in all circumstances, as in not be an absolute, not desirable or undesirable in all cases, but desirable in some and undesirable in others. This only brings closer attention to the particular context of the tree's service, which reveals that serving as a shrine is not the same type of use as serving the woodworker. It has only been implicit thus far, but the character translated throughout my version as use is yang, and is distinguished from the character that I have translated as to serve, which is wei. Yang can refer to a use or a means, but it has strong connotations of being used up and consumed. Wei, on the other hand, refers to some doing, making, acting, or serving. The tree's current form of service is not fitting of the character yang. Serving and being used as a shrine is distinct from serving and being used by a carpenter. By serving the shrine, the tree quite actually cannot be used. It can be admired or ignored, praised or disgraced, but it can't be used up, cut down, exploited, or abused. Hence, being used as a shrine is little different from being used as shade. But what then protects it, if not the crowd and their worldly conventions? Detached from the world of men, this is the tree of the natural, spontaneous, and, as it's considered in classical China, heavenly. It protects its heaven-given lifespan, and heaven protects it from the axes of men. Hence, what protects it, is not this crowd, but heaven itself. Thus, to praise it for a duty that man has attributed to it, namely the duty of being a shrine, would be to miss the point of its heavenly uselessness. The tree should not be praised with the earthly measures of men. Indeed, it grew on earth, but now it has reached heaven. Thus, it is in the world, but not of the world, a true exemplar of the thought of Zhuangzi. Now, with all that said, I feel like I've just about exhausted the meanings of the story. Surely I've missed some details here and there. If you notice any details that I missed, then let me know down below. But that's all I've got to talk about today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. If not, or if you thought I got anything wrong, please let me know what and why down below. And until next time.